Complex Appropriations, Other Otherness, Otti Berger and Vladimira Bratuž. Otti Berger and Vladimira Bratuž, two creative forces from an ex-Yugoslavia territory, did not know each other. It's about their immense creative power being so elegantly expressed in two different periods of the 20th century which draw my interest. As their work also present the 20th century appreciation of women in art and architecture, let me first present a brief philosophical background on women's position in 20th century society. Hegel was interested in the standpoints between masters and their slaves. He noticed that the relationship between master and slave was related to a person's position and on how information and authority was dictated. Marxist theory emerged from the Marxist argument that people from an oppressed class have special access to knowledge that is not available to those of a privileged class. Simone de Beauvoir's Other Sex writes of the specific ways that the natural and social sciences and the European literary, social, political, and religious traditions have created a world where conflicting ideals of femininity produce an ideology of women's natural inferiority to justify patriarchal domination. Generally, standpoint theory gives insight into specific circumstances only available to the members of a certain collective standpoint. Feminist standpoint theorists claim that certain socio-political positions occupied by women can become sites of epistemic privilege and thus productive starting points for inquiry into questions about not only those who are socially and politically marginalized, but also those who occupy positions of oppressors. This claim was generated by Sandra Harding, who said, starting off research from women's lives will generate less partial and distorted accounts not only of women's lives, but also of men's lives and of the whole social order. This practice is also quite evident when women enter into professions that are considered to be male-oriented, such as architecture. Otti Berger and the Bauhaus. Ottilia Esther Berger was born to a Jewish family in 1898 in Zmajevac, Croatia, close to the Hungarian border, which was then part of Austro-Hungarian Empire. Between 1922 and 1926, she studied at the Academy of Fine Arts in Zagreb. Even though the Bauhaus School was established already in 1919, it was not until 1928, under the head of Hannes Meyer, that women were allowed to study architecture. Otti Berger came to Bauhaus Dessau in study year 1926-27. As she had hearing difficulties, Bauhaus weaving workshop was ideal for her, and she soon became one of the most creative and most productive weaving workshop students and later also the head of the weaving workshop. Having in mind the Bauhaus slogan Art into Industry and Gesamtkunstwerk, the weaving workshop tried to answer new needs for upholstery fabrics of Bauhaus tubular steel furniture and covering large glass areas of modern architecture by experimenting with new technically innovative functional fabric such as iron thread, cellophane, and cellulose. Besides, the Bauhaus weaving workshop fabric patterns were functional, minimalistic, geometric, abstract, and artistically inspired with Bauhaus teachers Laszlo Moholy-Nagy, Josef Albers, Paul Klee, and Vasily Kandinsky. The Bauhaus weaving workshop was a great success of the school, also financially, and produced some great artistic personalities such as Annie Albers, to whom the New York Museum of Modern Art devoted a solo exhibition in 1949. During her Bauhaus period in 1929, Otti Berger joined a weaving course in Stockholm and gave a lecture about the Bauhaus there, which led to a Bauhaus exhibition in Stockholm in 1930. She exhibited fabrics with simple geometric patterns, emphasizing the structure of the fiber. She also published an article, Fabric in Space, in the 4 magazine, where she discussed the new functions of textiles with emphasis on texture, structure, and fracture. She designed the fabric for famous Villa Schminke, designed by the architect Hans Scharoun between 1932 and 33. Otti Berger is also the author of zebra fabric pattern for Altos chair number 39, produced by Siegfried Gideon's company Wombedarf in Zurich between 1933 and 35. The weaving workshop was an early testing ground for women emancipation. Even though women Bauhaus teachers were paid less than men and did not have pension rights, Otti Berger was the first and the only one of the Bauhaus women to get patents for her fabric in Germany and in England, and collaborated with textile companies in England, Germany, the Netherlands, and Switzerland. She also succeeded to put her trademark initials, OB, into some of her innovative industrially produced fabrics using techniques she herself developed. Following the Bauhaus principles, all the capital letters in most of Otti Berger's writings and titles were replaced with non-capital letters. She studied and experimented with relations between color and form and between material and reflection. Beside new artistic solutions, she put lots of her efforts to systematization and optimization of industrial production. In the Bauhaus Archive Berlin, as well as in other important museums around the world, there are over 1,000 of her studies for textile patterns, which speaks of her enormous creative power and production capabilities. Legislation passed in 1936 banned Jewish people from having business in Germany. Otti Berger was forced into exile, coming to London whilst awaiting an American visa. In England, she collaborated with Helios Textile Company. Unfortunately, in the end, she was not able to accompany her fiancé Ludwig Hilberseimer to America, where she was invited to lecture textile design at the new Bauhaus in Chicago, where most of the Bauhaus professors flee from Nazis in Germany. Instead, she left for Zmajevac to look after her ill mother. In 1941, when she was finally granted American visa, Yugoslav authorities refused to renew her passport. She was deported to Auschwitz concentration camp, where she died in 1944. Vladimira Bratuž and Slovenian structuralism. Vladimira Bratuž was born in 1923, 25 years after Otti Berger, and in 1942, during the Second World War, she started to study simultaneously architecture at Plečnik School and sculpturing under Professor František Smrdu at Academy of Fine Arts in Ljubljana. After her graduation at both studies, in 1950, she became Plečnik's assistant and continued her specialization studies at the Academy of Fine Arts. She collaborated with Plečnik on numerous war monuments and made his portrait sculpture in Križanke complex. Between 1952 and 53, she also collaborated with Professor Edvard Travnikar on his famous Rab Island Kamper Memorial Cemetery in Croatia. In 1955, she was awarded Diplôme d'honneur Cannes for her ceramic sculpture exhibition in France. In 1958, she designed her most famous concrete sculpture, The Fish, which is located in Ljubljana Tivoli Children's Playground and is used for children's play. It is influenced by Henry Moore and Barbara Hepworth. A unique functional sculpture, which is an unforgettable memory of most of the children from Ljubljana, mine as well. Inside hollowed-out fish body sculpture, there is just enough space to sit two children, and the feeling there is exceptional, almost like being in a small house or in a whale's belly. At the same time, it can be used to run through and slide out. It is static and dynamic at the same time, a sculpture and a playground, an organic and functional piece of art in any direction. It is a brave monument of time and at the same time timeless. It is at the same time architecture and sculpture, exactly the joint that Bauhaus philosophy was looking for in the first half of the 20th century. As such, it is a groundbreaking element in the history of Slovenian art and architecture and is being still in use after more than 60 years. During the years 1967 and 1981, Vladimira Bratuž was teaching at the Ljubljana School of Design. These were the years of Slovenian structuralism, with Edvard Ravnikar's Cankar Center presenting its peak. Vladimira Bratuž built her own studio, which she called Moj dom, in translation, My Home, in 1977, right in the year Cankar Center building site opened in a very close vicinity. The two buildings have much in common, especially in their similar structuralist approach, as in both cases the classical perspective and understanding of facades spreads into sequential views, which give more complex and multidimensional expression of the space and building elements. This brings new dynamism in the understanding of architecture in case of her studio in a very small scale, and in case of Cankar Center in a very large scale. In both structures, light comes from unexpected directions, which adds to excitement in building perception and is opposite to an early modernist rational, logical, and strict geometrical order. The building My Home was initially a garage, which Vladimira Bratuž adapted into a workspace and later expanded into a living studio. She created an articulated space where the central staircase with zenithal lighting divides the old section from the new annex. The building has 2 stories. The existing section is static and made of reinforced concrete. The new annex is made of modular hollow concrete blocks and reinforced concrete columns. For exterior cladding, rendered EPS panels were used. The roof cladding is sheet metal. The interior is innovative in structure and connected to the garden greenery by means of glass surfaces. The ground floor features a large anteroom, a kitchen, and living space. On the upper floor, above the garage, are studio and a sleeping section with a terrace alongside. Northern and eastern yard-side facade is varied. There is an oval pond in front of the house. Vladimira Bratuž passed away in 2006 in Ljubljana. The house has been refurbished and is now owned by Login family. Conclusion. Taking into account philosophical background of standpoint theory, and after a brief focus on brilliant work by Otti, Berger and Vladimira Bratuž, we can better understand the situation of women artists and architects in the first and second half of the 20th century. Parallel to multiple textile workers' strikes in the beginning of the century, which led to the women voting rights across the world in the second half of the century, there was a quieter revolution going on in the fields of art and architecture. In the Bauhaus, where in the first decade women were even not allowed to join architectural classes, a weaver, Otti Berger, was the one who was the true game changer. She was so vulnerable, on one hand, being a woman with hearing difficulties from the territory of ex-Yugoslavia, and so strong, creative, inventive, intelligent, brave, and talented on the other hand. She is a pioneer and educator of new weaving techniques, combining new materials with new textile designs developed and modified from different traditions. A devoted weaver, a revolutionary thinker, and internationally successful author and patent owner. Vladimira Bratuž, from the second half of the 20th century, Ljubljana-based architect, a sculptor, and educator, is the author of two milestone artworks from the time of Slovenian structuralism: The Fish and her home house, Moj dom, where she used groundbreaking concepts, materials, and building techniques which even inspired Edvard Ravnikar's Cankar Center structuralist approach. Both of them, Otti Berger and Vladimira Bratuž, still lack monographic exhibitions and books about their precious work.